and turn it over to Rob. Rob's going to tell us about making PowerShell useful for your team. And please have a look. You should be able to see the first slide. It's the slides are available, and you can download them right now. And we will be recording this session, and we'll post both the slides and the recording of the session later today after we get all that wrapped up. All right, without further ado, Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could hit the start recording button, that'd be great.
Excellent. I have started recording. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name's Rob. I am sat in the UK. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon here, so I've finished my days of work. So welcome to those of you who are joining for your lunch, and hope you have a good time. Slides are available at that link. If you need to, please go grab them. So, quick agenda. What we're going to do is we'll talk about people who are already using PowerShell, really, and you want to be able to share it with your team member, understand how to make it useful with the rest of your team, and maybe they've all got sort of different levels of ability. So my name's Rob. I've been doing PowerShell for 4 years now. I'm a SQL DBA. I joined a team, and the team rapidly left me, and I was by myself looking after over 1,000 databases, 100 odd servers, and that's how I started using PowerShell, because it really helped me to be able to do all that work from just one person. So we're going to go, that's who I am. What's PowerShell? What can we do with it? Why do you want to use PowerShell? And the bulk of the talk is going to be the how. How can we work through writing a script? How you can turn it into a function and then share it with your team and use source control. And where can you get some more help? And finally, a bit of a wrap up. So be quick, have a look. Those are my contact details. Feel free, contact me anytime you like. I'm always willing to help answer queries and questions. I might not be able to do it straight away, but I'll always try and get back as quick as I can. Details will come back later on. Oh yeah. Normally when I'm doing this presentation, I'm at user group, so I like to wave my arms around. So this is kind of my warning to move any liquids away from the keyboard. I'm sat at home now, so I've made sure that's all right. That was me at Relay last year. Anybody who's at SQL Bits would have seen me normally standing telling people how to get to registration and answering questions. So what's PowerShell? Well, according to MSDN, Windows PowerShell is a new Windows command line shell designed especially for system administrators. It includes an interactive prompt and a scripting environment that can be used independently or in combination. Okay, that's brilliant. It's a replacement for command prompt. Everybody knows that. It's a shell and it's a scripting language. But more than that, it's making use of all the .NET frameworks, and it's replacing the GUI. So Emin Atak has written a great post about how the server core GUI is making use of all the PowerShell behind the scenes. I've got the link on the slide, so you can actually click on and go have a look at that. And of course, it's Microsoft say that if you're going to be working with Microsoft products, you really should be using PowerShell, because if you're not, you're going to fall behind the times. So why should we use PowerShell? It appears my slides aren't coming up as this. What I want to be doing is building some new shiny things and spending my time looking at the best way of solving problems and completing documentation. Now, I know many people are going to go, yeah, I don't really want to be completing documentation, but you know that you've got to do it, and you know that it's important. And later on, I'm going to talk about some of the ways you can actually make that more automated and easier for your teams to help you. A lot of what I ended up doing when I first started in that role as a DBA was answering the phone, answering the email, the not ridiculous, but the mundane, repetitive tasks that kept coming on again and again and again. Automate everything. Wikipedia says automation is the use of machines, control systems and information technologies to optimize productivity in the production of goods and the delivery of services. Well, that as a DBA, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking after goods, I'm delivering service to people, so I should automate everything. John Sampson at SQL Brit on Twitter wrote a post that I come back to every single time I do a session. The best DBAs automate everything. And he says, automate everything. It sounds really scary, but automation doesn't mean scheduled. Automation means making things easier. Of course, much as we love PowerShell, we're all here because we're in the PowerShell virtual chapter. We're all interested in using PowerShell. Hopefully we're all using PowerShell as well. But it's not the only resource you should use. I must confess that I am one of the people that will waste many hours sometimes trying to get PowerShell to fix something that actually I could have done in a better way. So don't think PowerShell is the answer to all your questions, but it should be an answer to a lot of them. So one of the things we're going to look at is making repetitive tasks easier. Keeping going, doing the same thing again and again. When humans are doing it, it will introduce errors. Unfortunately, you know, we're humans, we make mistakes, and if you're doing something manually, then mistakes are going to happen. If we can automate these processes and make them happen with PowerShell, even if a human initiates that task, at least you know you're doing the same thing again and again. And if you're doing it wrong, you're doing the wrong thing again and again, which makes it much easier to troubleshoot and work out what's going on. Disaster recovery is one of my favorite means of making use of PowerShell. How can we recover our systems? How can we recover our databases? How can we rebuild our availability groups? I built an entire Azure environment, and I've had to pass the looking after that to another team now. And one of the things I was able to say was, if it all goes wrong, when they asked me, if it all goes wrong, we need to start from scratch, what do I do? I said, here you go. Here are the scripts. This is how you can do it. So let's make repetitive tasks easier and less tedious. If you using PowerShell already, you're probably able to write some scripts, or maybe you're working in the ISE and you're delivering stuff as and when you need it. That's brilliant. But if you're doing it more than once, write a function, because if you write the function, you can minimize the amount of typing that you can do. So that's some of my functions, and they're all things that I frequently got asked to do when I was a junior DBA. This drive might be running out of disk space. What are the permissions for this user? Could you show me what databases are on that server? When was the last time it was backed up? I had PowerShell open all the time. I could just find dash database, and I would go off and it would be find the database and which server it was on, and I could pass that information on straight away. So let's have a quick demo. So just so that you can see, I've got a few servers. Servers are in green and all my databases are in blue. So it's just a quick check for me as much as for you to show that my lab is up and running successfully and everything's working as it should do. Excuse me. So frequently get the question, is the drive space running out on this server? I use my show drive sizes function. Straight away, bang, there I go, I can see it. Immediately I can get that information back, pass it on to another team. I'm a DBA. I don't much like other people messing about in my servers, and when I started work at this place, the service guys would check my disk space by logging onto the server itself and opening up Windows Explorer. Once I found out about this, I pointed out this is not something that I recommended or that I wished them to be able to do. I passed on this function, and immediately they were like, "Wow, that's amazing! We can now, we can do this. We do it so much quicker." Here's some of the functions that I've got. I have a folder which is just my functions, which I'll describe in a while. But as you can see, I got things like where's the event log? Well, show me the last 24 hours of the SQL error log. When was what were the backups last on this server? Can you show me the SQL services? Are they all running? Can you show me the user login permissions? When were the last time Windows updates? Which ones were run? And I've forgotten how to zoom it. So, as I said, I was a DBA. I was looking after about 1,000 databases. I was the only one, but gradually I got 3 new members to come to join the team. And the first thing that they were frequently asked, as people came up and asked them, was, could you help me with database X? And of course, they had no idea where it was. I think, as everybody knows, when you're a DBA, after a while, you end up being able to reel off the servers and the databases off the top of your head. But when you're there on your first day, it's a bit tricky. So I enabled them to use find database script, which runs, it's very, very simple. What it does is it grabs a list of servers. Now, in this example, I'm using a text file with 1 server per line, but in production, I wouldn't recommend doing that. Hopefully, you've got a DBA database of some description, and I would make use of invoke SQL command 2 to grab the servers that you wish, because by getting in the habit of doing that, you can then split up your server list to be able to pick out services for particular services, or all the prod servers, all your development servers, all your testing servers. However you need to split it up, you can split it up much easier. But it's on my lab, it's just a text file. So we grab that into a server variable and then create a hash table. PowerShell in general is case insensitive, but every now and again you come across the odd thing that requires you to take advantage of case, and I decided to do it the old-fashioned way, just put everything to lowercase and then we'll match on that. Then we loop through the servers, check to see if any of them are not available, but without giving us any errors with a quiet. Create an SMO object, and then loop through each of the databases and see if the database name matches the search. And if the search is greater than 0, put out the details. And if not, just say, I'm really sorry, I can't find it anywhere. So, I don't know, I've got about 30 odd servers on here, 30 odd databases on here on 7 or 8 servers. And straight away, we can see I found it. Black Sabbath database is on SQL 2005, server 2003. And that saved me as a team leader 1,000 questions from my from the guys working for me about how much where is the database, how do I find it, where's this server, and it enabled them to be able to support the guys that were asking them the questions much easier. If you're following a change management shop, you're following ITIL, quite often a question that'll come up is, what databases are on that server? What will happen if we have to bounce it? What effect will we have if we upgrade? Which services are going to be affected when we need to make a change to this server? So we show the database of the server. It's very, very simple. We could actually just write this out nice and simply. It won't take us very much time. But actually, if you create yourself a function, then all you need to do is write show dash database on server and server name, and there we go. Those are our databases. There we go. Quickly say to people, this is what's going to be affected if you need to affect that system. And of course, as you've got your functions, you can then combine them into reports. So if we grab our server's text file again and loop through it, all we need to do is have the function called, and we can output the file to the we could output the results to a text file. So if we do this, here you can see on the screen I've got the databases on blah are as follows, and that's because in here I've used write host. Now write host will only ever output to the console, and the reason I'm showing you that is just to remember that write host won't actually follow the pipeline through into the file. So if we have a look in the file, what we've got is just a list of all the servers and all the databases that are on them. Very quick, very simple, and saves me a lot of time when I need to produce that information for management in general. Every DBA's got their own favorite way of looking at what's going on with the error log. I'm a PowerShell nerd, so I use PowerShell. Show the latest SQL error log, and as we can see, somebody's trying to get in. It's not going to save you all the time. It's not going to get you all the information you always need, but nice and quickly somebody says something's wrong. I don't need to go diving off and making a connection in Management Studio or writing a query in there. I can just write show latest SQL error log, and immediately I've got my information. So if we dive back to excuse me, to the presentation. So when I pass this information on to the rest of my team, and when you pass that information on to the rest of your team, you're going to get questions like, oh, well, that looks really difficult. How am I going to learn that? How do I learn all the syntax? And can you, as a leader, as a PowerShell expert, as the guy that everybody's going to come to, can I make that easier? Absolutely. Absolutely. Remember Control J. We'll have a look at Control J in a minute. Control J gives you all your snippets, and basically it means you don't have to learn or teach the syntax if you're careful. So maybe you're good at writing scripts, and you can write functions, and they enable you to do your job properly, but the rest of your team needs to use them, or perhaps the rest of your organization needs to use them. I write scripts and functions that are used by my service team, by my storage team, by my Exchange team, Active Directory team, desktop support team, the guys that look after SCOM and SCCM. All of them have come and asked me, you're the guy who knows PowerShell, I need it to try and do this, I can't get it to work, can you help me? So you're going to get asked those sort of questions. That's brilliant. It's good for you because it means you're providing more value, and you're also able to solve a few more problems with PowerShell, which I always think is fun. But you also need to be able to pass that information on to the rest of your team. Do you have to teach them? You don't have to teach them, but I'll show you a way of enabling them to solve some problems easier. Let's have a demo. Excuse me. I had actually lost my voice after I'd finished. I was helping at SQL Bits last week, and I lost my voice, and it's only just beginning to come back. So when you've got ISE open, press Control J, and here are a list of snippets, and I would say that they enable you want to do a while loop. There it is. We don't have to wonder whether it curly brackets or square brackets. Do I need a comma? Where's everything? Or a do until or a do while. Now, PowerShell comes with a lot of snippets already included, but the one thing it doesn't do is give you a snippet to create a new snippet. So here it is. Basically, if you run this code, this will create you a snippet which will enable you to create a new snippet. It's a bit of inception, but I think the real value in snippets is the same as the value of templates in Management Studio, is you can make them work for yourself. So one of the things I'm always doing is creating a server SMO object. So I created a snippet for it. I created a snippet for an Excel object, because I can output things into Excel from PowerShell and get them color coded, and because everybody knows that management really like color coded things, and a for each for my server. So if you have your server queries that are going to bring back all your live servers, all your production servers, all your development servers, create a snippet for each of those, and then you don't have to type it again, and that will just make it much easier, much quicker for you to be able to get everything that you need. I'd also say data table. I'm a SQL DBA. It's completely gone who wrote the out data table and write data table functions, but if you make use of those, you can basically bulk copy straight into SQL. So I quite often use the data table snippets to be able to quickly and easily create my data table object without having to think about how does it go and look up what's the correct syntax for that. So let's build our own function. Here is how I teach people to troubleshoot their way through a PowerShell problem. Last year at Southampton, I explained this to them, and one of the guys who had never opened PowerShell before came back to me the next day and said he'd had to change over 350 properties on an SSAS cube, and he was they had to do it manually, and he decided to follow this through and work out how to do it himself. And within an hour, he'd managed to solve something that used to take his team the best part of 6 hours to do manually, and they could do it in about 10 minutes. So we'll start off by defining two variables. We'll have a server variable and a database variable. We'll create our SMO object, and then we'll have a database one. Once you've got your object, then just use getMember. And as you can see from getMember, for the database object, you have all of these methods, and at the moment we're looking at all of these properties. In these properties, we've got a tables property. I think I probably forgot there. The problem that we're solving, so I probably should have explained just now, is a one-off requirement to report which indexes are on which file groups. Now, it might be the first time you've ever had to solve that problem, but you're pretty sure that you're probably going to have to do it again. And if you're going to write the code, you may as well write it in a way that's going to be reusable. So we found our tables property, and if we have a look at the properties of that, we can see we've got an index property. Let's look at it there. And if we look at the members of the index property, we can see we've got a name and a parent, and most importantly for this particular problem, a file group. So I would have used Control J here, pulled out the for each snippet, and I'd have gone for each table in tables, and then for each index in the indexes on that table, give me the name, the parent, and the file group. So we have that. We'll just make sure it works. We go like that, and there we are, the indexes in AdventureWorks 2012 on my availability group. There's the name of them, there's the table that they're on, and there's the file group that they're in. Of course, it's AdventureWorks, so they're all on primary, but it will enable you to solve the problem. Once you know that that works, all you do is copy the code apart from that variables at the top and create a function. Go to Control J, click on the functions. It says function, my function, and some parameters. So we're going to give the function a name, say function show indexes on file groups, because we want to make sure that we keep the verb noun syntax. And then we'll add two parameters, server name and a database name. Once you've run that to load it into memory, then the next time you have to do this, you say show indexes on file group on the server and database name. This time I've picked my MDW on a different server, and the results come out straight away. So, excuse me. So it's very simple, it's very easy, but how do I pass that on to my team? So we need to talk about profiles. Profiles load when PowerShell started. There are a number of them. You can have PowerShells, they can function, excuse me, you can have profiles for your administrator PowerShell, for your administrator PowerShell ISE, for your own for your own ISE, for your own PowerShell, and for an all users one as well. So if we have a look at, if you want to have a look at your profile, just do notepad $profile. I'm not going to show you that right now, but if we look at profile, that'll show you where it's kept. If you tried to create, if you did that and it's not, doesn't exist, you'll need to create it in, probably in this folder, in your user folders, in documents. You might need to create a Windows PowerShell folder, and then you can create this profile simply by typing new item $profile minus item type file, and away you go. And now any code that you put in there will be, excuse me, will be loaded every time that you load PowerShell and available for you to use. So when I first started, my PowerShell profile looked like this. I loaded some SMO objects for SQL. I pointed it at the directory where my scripts were stored, and then I loaded every file that had a .ps1 extension, and then I told myself that I'd done it. So that was brilliant. It worked really well for me, but it was all local to my machine. So if I needed to pass that on to the rest of my team, I had to copy the function somewhere, or maybe I had to use a shared drive and get them to get the information off there. So we started off using a shared drive, but unfortunately, if you give people access to a shared drive, sometimes they can make mistakes because they're human, and a function that you had written and was working perfectly gets altered by your teammates, and suddenly it's not there anymore, or it doesn't work quite in the way you expected. So I thought there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way of doing this. So we make use of TFS, Team Foundation Server from Microsoft. Now, within the organization, we use TFS internally, so I was able to make use of that. And I got the developers to give me a TFS project ready for our team, and we were able to use it. However, now I do the same with my own personal scripts, because I use TFS Online. There we go. So TFS Online, free for 5 users. So if you're only in a small team, you don't even have to pay anything at the moment. You could just set yourself up with a TFS online subscription and use that to source control your PowerShell functions. You can then use Visual Studio to add or check them out, edit them, check them back in, make sure that you've got all the latest versions. excuse me, or within PowerShell, you can make use of the commandlets. Now, the commandlets in PowerShell aren't brilliant. They don't have very good documentation, and that you'll find there's some little quirks of them that make life a little bit more tricky. But you can use add-tfs pending change to add a new function or to check it out. And my brain has gone dead again. So I'm going to show you another way to help your team find out what the issue is. Rob, what's the TFS command that you need to have? So we typed in get dash command star is our can't remember the word, star TFS star, and that will show us all of the commands that are available that have the name TFS in them. And add TFS pending changes will check out, and new TFS change set, I think, is the one that will check it back in again. Now we've got update TFS workspace there. I have not had very much luck with that. So what I do in my profile now is pass it, update the workspace in a different way. So we'll just skip through. So my profile now looks like this. I have loaded the TFS assemblies to enable us to use it. Now, if you want the commandlets, you'll have to install Visual Studio in a non-default manner. So you have to go into the advanced options and click the setting to install the commandlets. It doesn't install them by default, which I think is rubbish, but I'm just a PowerShell dude and not a Visual Studio man. We then get the path to our PowerShell functions in our TFS workspace. I make a distinguish between the ISE and the command just by checking using this global default variable PS ISE, which will tell us whether you've opened the ISE or whether you've opened the command. I create a local path variable to the users folder, documents, and a PowerShell function, and then I add on the end either CMD or ISE depending on what it is. Test to see if the local path exists, and if not, we'll create one. I then did this in .NET rather than using the TFS commandlets. So the first thing we do is get our collection, which uses the URI that we specified just now. That can either be your TFS online one, like I've got here, or it can be your local TFS server. And then we get the version controlled server object like that, and then we test whether our workspace exists. Here's the thing. If the workspace exists, my code at the moment just deletes it, because I never managed to get the get latest command method, to work successfully. So I figured we've just got our functions. I've got 60 or 70, but there's not a lot of data there. So we'll just delete it and recreate it. And then I remove all the scripts for the same reason, and then recreate the workspace and not get the latest, but get all of the functions that we've got up there in TFS. And then after that, I've got some stuff to add in the SMOs again. I like using Windows Forms, and then the same code again to load all the functions from that local path, and then we've got it. My profile also has the script browser, script analyzer add-ons, and I'd highly recommend that you make use of those. So go and check MSDN for those. Now the advantage to this is, now that I source control my profile, I can get the profile, if I wanted to, I could automatically get the profile added to the users folder for my team members via group policy or startup script, or any other way I wanted to. But if there's only 3 or 4 of you, you can simply just pass it to them by email. Here you go, put this in, create a profile, and then that all of the functions that you have available to you will then be available to them. And also you've got source control, so that if the scripts need to be altered or updated, or other people have good ideas and they want to do things slightly differently, you can work together as a team and develop those appropriately. Oh dear, I hope my voice does last out. So, complex tasks. So here's the scenario. So let me just have a drink for a minute. Here's a scenario. A service needs a database which uses availability groups, but the system that creates the data cannot be exposed externally. So there's a scheduled window where data refreshes are required. Obviously, errors introduced by manual refreshes cost money. This is a real life situation where the risk of the system that creates the data meant that there was no way it could be exposed to any sort of external functions, but the data produced by it is something that was needed for passing on to other customers. So this was the solution that was provided. When it was done manually, it only takes a small error in a file path name or a database name or a server name, and suddenly your scheduled window where you've got to do your refresh has gone past, and so your customers are complaining, and service desk getting phone calls, and the boss is at the desk going, what's going on? So PowerShell, absolutely brilliant, let's do that. Or could also be for your disaster recovery runbook. If you know that you've got a script that will recreate this availability group without any issues every time, that is your disaster recovery. So this page is so that I remember not to have my demo fail because the primary is on the other node. So we've got a primary, we've got availability group here, which is sat on AG1 as the primary, and it has the cunningly titled test database with a table called name, and our, let me try that again, and our load database is coming from this server 2012 it's test database, and it's called name again. So if we have a quick look at these two tables, we can see that both of them have got 300 rows in the table. So what I'm going to do is I am connected to the source database, and I'm going to insert 100 rows, 1, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So when I've done demos of this before, people have said, how do you get that data? I make use of a website called generatedata.com, which just allows you to create dummy data in as many ways as you like. I think the free version only allows you to do 100 rows, but it's enough to be able to provide you with good demo experience. So if we check the tables again, we can see that the source database has got 800 rows as expected, and the customers one has only got 300 at the moment. So what we need to do is take a backup of the source database and restore it over the availability group. Obviously, we can't just restore it over the availability group. We've got to do a little bit more work than that. So I'm just going to start this running, and then I'll step you through and show you what we've got. So that's now running. So we load our SMO objects. Here's another tip I would say. If you're doing things like this, always make sure that you load all assemblies or all modules that you need, or any functions you need to call at the top of your script that you're using. Because if you're using a disaster recovery runbook, you only want to have that one script to worry about. You just want to be able to pick that one up and run it on whatever machine that's got whatever loaded, you know it's going to work. So pick a load server and set variables for the database names, the availability group server names, and a date, just so we know how long it's going to take. Some more variables for the backups so that we know where they are. In this case, the shares, obviously, you need to make sure you've got the correct permissions granted for the service accounts that you're using to be able to access those folders. And then we look at the availability database objects. So this is where you use PowerShell in PS Drive mode to access the availability groups, and we just set them up like that. What I then do, frequently when you're working with SQL and you are working with file paths as well, especially when you're using agent jobs to call PowerShell, you'll find that things won't work. One of the reasons they won't work is because you've imported the SQL modules, and PowerShell has changed to the SQL Server drive like this, which can make accessing the file paths more tricky unless you specify that it is a file path object that you're accessing. The easy way around that, just CD back to the root C drive, and then everything will work. So remove any old load backup files that we've got, and CD, we remove the secondary server from the availability group, like so, just using the remove SQL availability database commandlet. Then the tertiary, the read-only, the async one, and then finally the primary one. Back up the load database. I've used the backup SQL database commandlets here, but you can also do it with .NET. I would say if you're going to do anything with backing up and restoring SQL databases in PowerShell, have a look at Stuart Moore. That's M-O-O-R-E. He's done a 31-day, one post a day blog on PowerShell and SQL databases backing up and restoring. It's very good. So obviously, if we're restoring the database, we need to be able to remove any connections. This is not perfect, because what we do here is just kill all the processes that are connected to that database. And it is possible that between here and here, something else could jump in and get it, at which point it would fail. Or you could put some try catch in and just get it to retry. So we restore the primary database, we take a transactional backup of that, we restore it onto the secondary, both the full and the transaction log, and then onto the tertiary one as well. And then we add them back into the availability group, and it is as simple as doing that. And of course, there's no manual risk of errors here, because we've coded all of this, we've checked it, we've tested it, we know it all works. So every time it's going to do the same thing. Every time it's going to take the same amount of time, as long as the database is the same size and the network traffic is the same, and et cetera, et cetera. The last bit we do, and this is something I make use of in other ways as well, is to check the status of the availability group. And that's done like so, by creating an SMO object and accessing the availability groups with the availability group name, and then the database replica states is the command that you want. And I've not followed my own rules, because normally I would put format table. That's format table with what size. And then a bit of writing out just to say that we've done it, but also just to be able to paste into an email report or into your incident management system to say this is what I've done and this is what I've done. And this is what it looks like. So we can see, we know that everything's worked. We know we've removed all the databases. We've done the backing up and the restoring. We've added the databases back to the availability group. Here is our status. As expected, primary and secondary are synchronized, and the async one is in synchronizing state. And you can see that some work we're still doing. We've got some estimated recovery time still running there, but that'll catch up very quickly. And this time it took 1 minute and 30 seconds, but you can make use of that to pass on, so you know that it's always going to take 30 minutes, or it's going to take 45 minutes, or it's going to take 5 hours, however long it normally takes for your organization. And if we go back and have a look at this, we can see, as expected, both the load database and the customers database are now got 800 rows in them. So one of the things I was talking about was documentation. If you make sure that you get your headers right, and neither of those are good examples of headers. If you make sure that you get your headers right for your scripts, then what you'll find is you can say to your team members, they say, well, I don't know what the command is. If we get command we'll use get services because that's always a good one. Oh, right, forget that. What they need to do, once they've found the command that they need, is type that, get help, get service, or whichever command it is. And PowerShell, when it stops trying to, for some reason my IntelliSense has got itself in a pickle here. Let's see if we can find one. Apologies, it's all gone a bit...
IntelliSense does that to me quite frequently when I have the SQL Server provider loaded up.
It is quite often a pain with the SQL Server provider. So there we go. Let's try have a look at this. If you look at the header on this script, you can see it's done in this format with the less than sign and a hash to create a multi-line comment, and then dot synopsis, dot description, dot parameter name, dot example, and that enables people to gather the help information nice and easily. So I insist that all of my juniors make sure they write their scripts with the proper header, so that no matter what, anybody can look at it and see what's going on, and also include some examples. Excuse me. So where can I go to find out more? Pick your favorite search engine. Whichever one of those it is going to be the right one for you to choose. I would say use the search term PowerShell space SMO if you're going to look for SQL Server SMO objects, and then server name or databases or SSAS or whatever it is that you wish to know more about, and go into MSDN and see as a good point of starting. So I would generally, when I have issues, I would start from here. So this is your MSDN main page for SQL Server PowerShell provider, and then we'll go down here. Normally click on the SMO and move on into the servers or the databases or whichever class or method or property it is that you want to examine. Okay, I promised it would be about 50 minutes, so we're slightly over time, but hopefully you've learned that anybody can use PowerShell. It's nice and simple to learn. You've learned how to create a function, so once you've worked out your code to do whatever it is you need, you can create a function to make it reusable, say if you have to type it out again. You've understood about Control J and the fact you can use that for learning how to write PowerShell and the syntax and the functions and using the correct help, but also how to create your own snippets to use things that you need for your shop. How to pass on the knowledge to your team by making use of your profile, holding it in a shared place, or making use of TFS, even online TFS and source control, and how more complex scripts can help you reduce the human errors and make things happen all in one go, and where to go for some more help. If there are any questions, I'm sure Aaron will shout them to me.
So far, pretty basic questions. One, Rob, can you show us your $PS version table so that people know what version of PowerShell you're on?
Okay, I'm running PowerShell 4 on there. I certainly can.
Okay.
I certainly could if I could. There we go. So there we go. That's what we're using there.
Perfect. And then lots of questions about will the scripts be available afterwards. Scripts.
Okay.
And then any book recommendations for someone for a SQL DBA who has zero programming language experience to learn PowerShell?
A book recommendation. I would start with PowerShell in a bunch of lunches. Yep. As a starter for using PowerShell, and I would
I recommend it as well. Yeah.
And I would say read the blogs, because I think it depends on each the road, I guess. What I do is I've learned much better by doing. So I would say, what is that challenge that I want to do? And I would go and find the blogs to be able to work out how to do that myself. I wouldn't specifically go for a book. I'd build up your knowledge through those tasks. Start with your SMO. Start with something simple like showing the databases on a server or accessing the SQL error log. And maybe start trying to accomplish tasks that you do more manually with PowerShell to be repetitive.
Right. And there's a trick question in here. When would you write a PowerShell script versus a PowerShell function?
I would use a script when I am writing something for a disaster recovery runbook. I would write a function if I'm ever going to do something more than once.
Yes, and to that end, the script, I would assume, would probably call lots of functions, right?
Exactly, yes. And as I said earlier, I would, when I'm writing DR runbook scripts, I make use of all the functions I've already got, but I include them in the beginning of the script. So I don't trust that my PowerShell profile is going to have loaded all the functions that I need. I make sure that everything's there in that script, so it's a one-hit win.
Yep. And actually, I just found the scripting guy's blog post on why you shouldn't script. That's perfect. Let's see. Yes, it'll be uploaded in past site later today, everyone. I think that's it, and then someone wants to see the TFS script, and I'm sure they'll see that in the stuff that we upload. So,
absolutely. So I'm going to throw people at that SQL Saturday Exeter because I'm one of the organisers. It's happening next month. You know, if you're in the UK or if you fancy a trip to the southwest of England and you live somewhere else, please come and see us. There's a discount code there as well. And what I will do is, if I run back, there's probably an easy way of doing this, but if we go back to there's the link to all the slides and the demos, so you can grab the TFS script is included in that as well. And like I said, any questions, give me a shout. Just get in touch. You'll find me via my blog or at Fade to Black UK on Twitter.
all right, great. Thanks a lot for doing this for us today, Rob. Really appreciate it.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right.
Excellent. Rob, if you want to go ahead and hit stop on the recording right now.